My husband left me for another woman. He took my own family to their wedding abroad. He texted me, "Don't be home when we get back. Once it's old, it's dead to me." They all returned and saw what I had done. Their smiles vanished. They looked at the empty land and asked each other one terrified question. I just watched from my car and smiled. I found the receipt by accident. Tucked behind the flower jar, thin as a secret, the paper listed 2 first-class tickets to Santorini, Rick Hale and Chloe Morgan. Departure, next week. The same week as our 35th anniversary. He told me not to be here when they came back. So I made sure they'd never forget what coming back felt like. For a long second I just stared at the ink, my thumb trembling against the smudged total. The kitchen light flickered and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between breaths. I remember whispering, "Who hides love behind grocery flour?" The oven timer went off. The roast chicken was ready. I turned it off without checking. The smell of rosemary and butter, the dinner I'd been making for hours, suddenly made me nauseous. Rick would be home soon, expecting praise for another late meeting. When his truck rumbled up the driveway, I slipped the receipt into my apron pocket. He entered whistling, sunburned from some job site visit, and kissed my cheek out of habit. "Smells good," he said, loosening his tie. "Was the meeting productive?" I asked. He nodded, pouring himself iced tea. "You wouldn't understand, hon. Contractor delays, numbers, stress." I smiled, the practiced kind that never reached my eyes. Must be exhausting, all that stress. He didn't notice the edge in my tone. He rarely noticed anything that wasn't about him. When you live 35 years with someone, the betrayal doesn't hit like lightning. It seeps in like rain through the ceiling, slow and silent, until everything inside smells of rot. I used to think marriage was about endurance. Fixing, forgiving, pretending not to hear the things said under breath. Rick had convinced me that's what good wives do. Every morning I woke before him to make coffee black with 1 sugar. He'd grunt a thank you, read his phone, and tell me what I was doing wrong with my day before I'd even begun it. "Margie, that blouse is too bright. Don't waste time at the community center. You don't need to drive all the way to Emily's. Gas isn't free." He spoke like life was a budget and I was the most expensive item on it. Our children, Emily, 31, a nurse, and Jason, 28, an electrician, saw a version of him I didn't. To them he was dependable, loud, funny at barbecues. When he teased me in front of them, "Your mom can burn water if she tries hard enough," they laughed. I laughed too, because what else could I do? Inside, something chipped away year by year like paint flaking off the walls we kept promising to repaint. The night after I found the receipt, I couldn't sleep. Rick snored beside me, the glow of his phone lighting his face each time he checked messages. I turned toward the window, watching snow drift against the porch light. I thought about the woman's name, Chloe Morgan. My niece. My sister's daughter. I remembered her sitting at our dining table last Thanksgiving, twirling her hair and calling Rick Uncle Charm. She'd been recently divorced then, crying about how men her age wanted younger women. The irony could have burned through steel. I got up, wrapped myself in a robe, and went to the kitchen. The clock ticked like a heartbeat. I pulled the receipt out again, flattening it on the counter. Each printed word was a nail sealing the coffin of the life I'd built. I whispered, "He bought her first-class seats. He never even let me fly economy." The ridiculousness made me laugh, sharp and breathless. Then I poured myself tea, sat at the table, and stared at the dark window until my reflection blurred. Somewhere between the second and third cup the tears stopped. Not because the pain was gone, but because the pain had found direction. The next morning, Rick acted as though nothing was wrong. He asked if I'd ironed his blue shirt, kissed my cheek again, and told me not to wait up. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a stranger wearing my husband's habits. When he left, I called Emily. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "does your father seem distant lately?" She sighed. "Mom, he's just tired. You overthink things." Overthink. That word again. I almost smiled at how neatly she'd inherited his tone. I hung up and stood by the window, watching his truck disappear down Maple Street. My hands rested on the counter edge until my knuckles whitened. It's strange, realizing you're the only one left in a marriage long before it ends. That afternoon I walked through the house as if seeing it for the first time. The creak in the hallway floorboard. The dent in the living room wall from when Jason threw a baseball indoors. The faded floral wallpaper Rick always said we'd replace someday. Every corner held pieces of me, quiet, overlooked, necessary. I dusted picture frames and lingered on one from our early years. Rick holding baby Emily, smiling like the world had just opened for us. I remember the night he hung that frame. He'd said, "This house is our foundation." Funny. I used to believe him. Later that week he invited his sister over for dinner. I cooked stew, set the table, and stayed mostly silent while they chatted about flights and resorts. "So you're really going?" his sister asked. Rick laughed. "Why not? Life's short. A man deserves some fun after decades of hard work." She smirked. "And what about Margaret?" He didn't even lower his voice. "She's fine. She's like this house, sturdy, predictable. Keeps standing no matter what you throw at it." They both laughed. I served dessert with shaking hands, spilling a bit of cream on the saucer. "Sorry," I murmured. "No harm done," he said, not meeting my eyes. That night I lay awake again, listening to the wind rattle the windows. The laughter from dinner replayed in my mind, looping until it lost meaning. The next morning I decided to clean the attic, a place Rick never bothered with. Dust coated the boxes labeled memories, Christmas, old bills. I found my wedding dress sealed in plastic. Yellowed lace. I sat on the floor, running my fingers along the fabric, and whispered, "You lasted longer than the vows." I almost laughed, then almost cried. Instead I folded it back carefully and noticed another envelope behind the box. A home insurance file. My name sat alone on the policy. No Rick Hale listed. No joint ownership. I blinked, reading twice. Somehow, in all those years of letting him handle everything, I still owned something entirely mine. A flicker of something stirred, maybe defiance, maybe curiosity, but it felt alive. I closed the envelope and placed it gently on my lap. The floorboard creaked and a thin beam of sunlight sliced through the dusty air, landing right on the papers. It felt like the house itself was whispering a secret I had forgotten. That evening, as Rick watched television downstairs, I stood at the top of the staircase holding that envelope. He laughed loudly at some joke on the screen, the sound echoing up through the house like a reminder of all the noise he'd filled my silence with. I whispered to myself, "He built his comfort on my quiet." Then I slipped the envelope into the drawer beside my bed. I didn't know what I would do yet, but for the first time in years, I felt the faint rhythm of possibility. When the night deepened and Rick fell asleep on the couch, I went out to the porch. The air smelled of rain and distant wood smoke. Across the street, the Miller boy was washing his car under the streetlight, music playing softly. Life went on. Ordinary, steady. But inside me, something subtle had shifted. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is loud and short-lived. What I felt was quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. I looked at our house. The chipped paint, the sagging gutter, the place he called his domain. And for the first time I saw it not as home but as structure. Wood, brick, glass. Replaceable. I whispered, "Foundations can burn too." Then I went inside, turned off the lights, and closed the door softly behind me. The morning light came in pale and cold, slicing through the half-open curtains. I hadn't slept much. My body lay still, but my mind kept wandering through half-built sentences and unfinished thoughts. I could still smell last night's rain through the window screen, damp and metallic. Rick's alarm went off at 6:30 and he slapped it silent, yawning like a man with no worries in the world. "Big day today," he muttered, stretching. I glanced at him. "What's special about today?" He looked at me blankly for a second before pretending to remember. "Oh, right. 35 years. He reached for his phone. "You still want to do dinner or something?" I smiled faintly. "I already have something planned." He nodded absently, scrolling through messages. "Great. Keep it simple. You know I hate big gestures." That was the closest thing to affection I'd get that morning. By noon I'd scrubbed every inch of the kitchen. The floor gleamed, the counter smelled faintly of lemon. A roast chicken sat marinating in a bowl, our tradition. I made it every anniversary the same way my mother used to, with butter tucked under the skin and rosemary sprigs laid like tiny veins across the top. As I basted the meat, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily, "Coming over later with Jason. Dad invited us." That wasn't unusual. Rick loved having an audience for our happy marriage. I assumed this would be another performance. I just didn't know the script had changed. By 5 o'clock the house was spotless. I wore my pale blue dress, the one Rick said made me look put together. I even put on lipstick for the first time in months. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked composed, but my chest felt tight like something was pushing from the inside. The front door opened. Rick stepped in carrying not flowers or gifts but a suitcase. Behind him came Emily and Jason, both smiling, both unaware. "Margie," Rick said, voice casual, "you might want to sit down." I stayed standing. "What's with the suitcase?" He sighed dramatically. "Let's not make this harder than it is." Jason frowned. "Dad, what's going on?" Rick set the bag down, smoothed his shirt and looked me in the eye. "I'm leaving, Margaret. I've been seeing someone. We're going away for a while." My voice barely came out. "Who?" "Chloe," he said. "Your niece. You always said she was like family." His tone was almost smug, like he was proud of his wit. The room tilted slightly. Emily's smile vanished. Jason looked between us, confused. "Wait, what do you mean, Chloe?" Rick shrugged. "It's not complicated. We're adults. We fell in love. We deserve to be happy." No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, one loud click at a time, marking the moment my life split in half. Emily whispered, "Dad, that's Mom's niece." "She's not blood to me," Rick said sharply. "And she's been good to me in ways your mother hasn't been for years." He said it so easily, like it was truth carved in stone. Jason tried to lighten the air. "Dad, this is crazy. Just talk this out." Rick waved a dismissive hand. "I've talked enough. I'm done pretending. Margaret and I stopped being husband and wife a long time ago." He turned to me. "You can keep the house for now. I'll handle the paperwork later. Just don't make things messy." "Messy?" He said it like I was a stain on his reputation. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, feeling a stillness creep through my bones. "You chose my blood," I said softly, "to humiliate me." Rick rolled his eyes. "Don't start playing victim. You checked out years ago." I looked at my children, waiting for one of them to say something. Anything. Jason looked at the floor. Emily's lip trembled, but she forced a smile at her father. "Dad, are you sure this is what you want?" Rick smiled. That same smile he used when fixing deals, confident and smug. "I've never been surer." He picked up his suitcase, brushing past me toward the door. The air shifted as he moved, like the house itself was exhaling in disbelief. "Chloe's waiting outside," he said. "We fly out tonight." Emily followed him, voice small. "Can we talk about this later?" He kissed her cheek. "I'll call when we land. Be good to your mom." The door closed behind him. The click echoed like the final nail in a coffin. Jason stayed a few minutes longer, pacing. "Mom, he's lost it. Maybe this is some kind of midlife thing." I sat at the table, smoothing the edge of the tablecloth. "Your father doesn't do things halfway. If he's gone, he's gone." Jason opened his mouth to speak but stopped. "I'll call tomorrow," he muttered, grabbing his keys. The front door opened and shut again, leaving me in a silence that felt enormous. The chicken was done. Perfectly golden. I pulled it from the oven and set it on the counter. The rosemary had crisped beautifully, the butter pooled beneath the skin. It smelled like every anniversary we'd ever had, familiar, warm, meaningless now. I set the table anyway. 2 plates. 2 glasses. Candlelight. It was absurd, but the motions kept me upright. When the clock struck 7, I sat down and poured myself a glass of wine. The chair across from me was empty, but I could almost see him sitting there. The version of him that existed only in my hope. I raised the glass, my hand steady. "To 35 years, I whispered. "And to the woman who survived every one of them." The wine burned my throat. Around 8, headlights swept across the window. My heart jumped, then stilled. I peeked through the curtain, not Rick but Emily. She stood on the porch, hugging herself. I opened the door and she stepped inside, her eyes glossy. "Mom," she said softly, "he texted me. He wanted me to tell you not to make a scene." I stared at her. "A scene?" She nodded. "He said he'd call in a week to talk about arrangements." I laughed quietly. "Arrangements? Like a funeral?" She winced. "Mom, please don't make this worse. He said he needs space." "Space," I repeated. "He took that already." Emily's eyes filled again. "I don't want to lose both of you." I walked over and hugged her. Her shoulders were stiff, hesitant. She smelled like the lavender lotion I used to buy her. When she finally pulled away, she whispered, "You'll be okay, right?" I smiled. "I always am." She left soon after. The house settled into stillness again. The candle on the table flickered, wax running down in slow tears. I sat back down and stared at the untouched food. The chicken had cooled, the wine gone flat. A sound broke the silence, the faint buzz of my phone on the counter. I reached for it, half hoping it was Jason checking in. Said it was Rick. A message preview glowed on the screen. "Don't be home when we get back. Once something's old, it's useless to me." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The words themselves filled the room, settling heavy in the air. I walked to the table, turned off the candle, and sat in the dark for a long time. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and I felt the house shift, like it finally understood we were both free of him. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady. I let it fall. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. I just sat there, hands folded on the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. And for the first time in 35 years, I let the silence stay. The house didn't feel like mine that night. It breathed too loudly. Every creak of the floorboard, every sigh of the air vents sounded like someone whispering my name in an empty hallway. I sat at the table until the candle wax hardened around the wick and the room smelled of smoke and butter. When I finally stood, my knees cracked. The chair scraped the floor, a small human noise inside a house that suddenly seemed far too large for one person. I turned off the lights one by one, letting the darkness swallow the kitchen, the living room, the staircase. Upstairs, his jacket still hung on the hook, creased, faintly smelling of aftershave. I brushed my fingers against it, then pulled my hand back fast as if it might burn. In the bedroom, the bed looked wrong. One side smooth, the other collapsed from the weight of years. I lay down on his pillow anyway because it was colder and watched the ceiling blur until dawn. The next morning I woke to silence. Not the comfortable kind, the heavy kind that presses against your chest. The clock read 7:18. Rick would have been out the door by now, coffee in hand, complaining about traffic on Route 22. Instead, there was only the low hum of the refrigerator and a faint ticking from the hallway thermostat. I walked barefoot into the kitchen. The chicken from last night still sat covered in foil. I lifted the corner, stared at the congealed gravy, then pushed it into the trash. The motion felt symbolic, though I wasn't sure of what. I made coffee and drank it standing by the window. Outside, Mrs. Dawson was walking her dog. She waved, cheerful as always. I waved back automatically. For her, the world hadn't changed overnight. For me, everything had. I washed the mug and set it upside down on the rack. Then I turned around slowly, letting my eyes move over the room. The fridge magnets, the postcards from trips that now felt fictional, the oil stain on the wall Rick kept promising to paint over. The details felt cruelly intact, as if the house itself refused to acknowledge what had happened. By noon I started cleaning again. That's what I always did when I didn't know what else to do. Clean. I stripped the bed, washed the sheets, scrubbed the bathroom until the smell of bleach stung my eyes. When I reached the living room, I paused in front of the mantel. Family photos lined it. Jason at graduation, Emily holding her first newborn patient, Rick with his arm around me at Niagara Falls. I took each frame down one at a time and wiped away the dust. In one picture, Rick was looking at me, not the camera. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to recognize what I used to see there. Admiration? Possession? I couldn't tell anymore. I put it face down on the coffee table. The afternoon light poured through the curtains, warm and unforgiving. It exposed every crack in the paint, every scuff on the floorboards. The house looked older, and for the first time so did I. The phone rang around 3. I let it buzz twice before picking up. Mom. It was Emily. Her voice sounded careful, like someone tiptoeing across broken glass. Just checking in. You okay? I'm fine, I said automatically. You sure? I can come by later. No, sweetheart. You've got work tomorrow. Pause. He called me this morning. Said they landed safely. Greece looks beautiful. I'm sure it does. I stared at the window again, watching a single bird hop along the fence. Thank you for letting me know. Mom, don't be mad at me, okay? I'm not mad, I said, and realized it was true. I wasn't mad at her. I wasn't even mad at him. I was something deeper than that. Emptied out, scraped clean of feeling. After she hung up, I turned the ringer off and left the phone on the counter. Evening crept in quietly. The streetlights flickered to life, one after another, like a string of small promises outside the window. I heated a can of soup, burned my tongue on the first spoonful, then laughed out loud at myself. The sound startled me. It had been days since laughter. When I finished eating, I went to the closet in the hallway, the one filled with things Rick always said he'd get to someday. Boxes, old tools, a half-deflated basketball. I started pulling everything out, stacking it neatly in the corner. At the bottom was a metal tin labeled important in his handwriting. Inside were receipts, old car titles, and insurance papers. I flipped through until one document made me stop. Property deed, 14 Maple Street. Owner, Margaret Hale. Only my name. Not ours. Not his. I checked again to be sure. The paper was dated nearly 15 years ago, the year we refinanced after Jason started college. Rick had handled all the signatures. I'd simply trusted him. And yet, somehow it was mine. Completely mine. I sank to the floor, the tin beside me, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. A strange, light feeling filled my chest, half disbelief, half relief. The house that had trapped me for decades suddenly felt like an open field. I whispered, "So that's why you never let me see the paperwork." The silence didn't answer, but it seemed to shift. The hum of the refrigerator grew softer, the ticking clock steadier, as if the house itself exhaled with me. Later, I carried the deed upstairs and placed it on my nightstand. The bed looked different in the lamplight, not lonely, just wide. I changed into an old sweatshirt and sat cross-legged, staring at the paper. My thoughts moved in circles. All the years I'd cooked, cleaned, waited. All the nights he'd criticized, mocked, ignored. Each memory landed quietly, without pain, like feathers settling after a storm. I picked up my journal, dusty, half-used, and began to write. Not about him. About the house. About the way the sunlight touched the kitchen counter in the mornings, the way rain sounded on the roof when Jason was little, the way laughter once echoed down these halls. By the time I looked up, the page was full. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in years. I closed the book and set it aside. At midnight, thunder rolled in the distance. I opened the bedroom window. Cool air swept through, carrying the scent of wet leaves. The street was empty. Even the stray cat that sometimes prowled the porch was gone. I turned off the lamp and stood there, leaning on the windowsill, watching lightning flicker faintly over the neighbors' roofs. For a brief moment, the reflection in the glass showed two faces. Mine and the ghost of the woman I used to be. "I'll take care of us now," I said softly to the reflection, to the house, maybe to no one at all. The rain started again, tapping gently against the window pane. I lay back on the bed, pulling the blanket to my chin. The deed rested beneath the lamp, a quiet secret glowing under the light. Somewhere downstairs, a floorboard popped, settling into place. It was the same sound it always made, but tonight it didn't startle me. It felt almost like acknowledgement. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the rain, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. By morning, the rain had stopped. The sky looked rinsed clean, pale blue behind the lace curtains. The house was still. No footsteps, no humming refrigerator, just the faint tick of the wall clock marking the silence. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night dissolve into something new. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel paralyzed. I felt deliberate. My hands moved before my thoughts did. I folded the blanket, made the bed tight and smooth, placed the deed neatly on the nightstand. Then I stood at the window, watching water drip from the maple tree in the yard. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly, notebook open in front of me. I didn't know what I was planning yet, just that I was done waiting for anyone to decide my life for me. The house creaked as it warmed under the sun. I took that as permission to begin. The first call I made was to City Hall. My voice sounded steady even to my own ears. "Hi, this is Margaret Hale. I need some information on property permits." The woman on the other end shuffled papers. "What kind of permits, ma'am?" I hesitated for a second. "Demolition." She paused. "Demolition? You mean removal?" "Yes," I said. "Complete removal." She transferred me to another department where a man named Mr. Patel answered. His voice was calm and patient, the kind of tone people use when explaining things to someone fragile. Mrs. Hale, you'll need to fill out a form, get a structural assessment and, well, it's not a small decision. I know, I said quietly. It's not small. But it's mine. He cleared his throat. All right. I can help you through it. Do you want to come by the office? Yes, I replied. Today. The drive into town felt strange. The streets looked familiar. The bakery, the old library, the gas station where Rick used to chat with the clerk about football. But it all felt slightly tilted, like the world had shifted a few degrees overnight. I parked near the municipal building and sat in the car for a moment before going in. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A young receptionist pointed me toward a small office at the end of the hall. Mr. Patel stood when I entered, tall, polite, mid-50s with silver at his temples. Mrs. Hale, he said. Please sit. His desk was covered in blueprints and stacks of permit forms. Behind him, a corkboard displayed photos of local houses mid-renovation, some half-torn down, some newly built. I looked at the one of a leveled foundation and felt an unexpected calm. He started explaining the process, pointing at papers, using words like assessment, safety, timeline. I nodded, absorbing everything. At one point he paused, lowering his voice. If you don't mind me asking, why demolition? Most people remodel. I looked him in the eye. Because I don't want to fix something that's rotten underneath. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded respectfully. Fair enough. We can have an inspector out this week. Thank you, I said. My voice didn't tremble once. As I left, the receptionist smiled politely. Starting over, huh? Something like that, I said. Back home, the air smelled of damp wood and sunlight. I opened every window. The house exhaled a long, tired sigh as fresh air moved through the rooms. Then I started packing, not frantically, not like someone escaping, but methodically. I began with the closets. Rick's suits went first. One by one, I folded them neatly, placed them into boxes and labeled each, donate. His shoes followed, then the stack of old magazines he kept in the study. Each item gone made the space feel lighter. In the bedroom, I cleared the nightstand drawers. Receipts, pens, cufflinks, spare keys. I found one of his watches still ticking faintly. I held it for a moment before setting it down on the dresser. Time I thought had always belonged to him. Not anymore. I loaded the car with donation boxes and drove them to the thrift store downtown. The volunteer unloading the boxes was a woman around my age with kind eyes and strong hands. She glanced at the neat labels. Doing some spring cleaning? Something like that, I said again. She smiled. Feels good, doesn't it? It does, I admitted. More than I expected. When I came back home, I walked straight to the garage. Dust floated through the sunlight like tiny fireflies. Rick's old workbench sat cluttered with tools he hadn't used in years. Hammers, wrenches, cans of paint. I wiped the surface clean and lined everything in order, then left a note on top that simply said free to take. By evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea watching the neighborhood wind down. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and asphalt. A few kids rode bikes down the street laughing. A mail truck rumbled by. Normal life continued, but I felt like I was standing slightly apart from it, like a spectator watching the world rebuild itself. When the mailman handed me a few envelopes, one caught my eye. City of Maple Permit Office. Inside was the demolition packet Mr. Patel had promised. My name at the top. No Rick. No signatures missing. Just me. I placed the papers on the coffee table and smoothed them flat. There was power in that small motion, in claiming something quietly. The next few days passed in a rhythm. Morning coffee, sorting, donating, paperwork. My body moved through the house like it was performing a ritual of unburdening. I found forgotten things. Jason's toy car under the couch, an old grocery list, a half-burned candle that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. Every object had a memory attached, and I learned to let each one go without ceremony. On the fourth day, Mr. Patel called. Inspection's done, he said. Everything's structurally clear. We'll process the permit by Monday. Thank you, I said. He hesitated. It's a big step. You sure you're ready? I smiled faintly into the phone. I was ready a long time ago. I just didn't know it. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was nearly empty now, walls bare, shelves cleared, echoes louder. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The glow of the screen painted the room in cold light. I typed controlled demolition into the search bar. Video after video appeared. Buildings collapsing neatly, clouds of dust rising, crowds watching from safe distances. I clicked one at random. The structure in the video trembled, tilted, and folded in on itself. No chaos. No violence. Just precision. It was almost beautiful. The way something solid could dissolve so gracefully when guided by the right hands. I watched another. And another. The hum of the computer blended with the ticking clock. I rested my chin on my hand and whispered, "That's how you end something right? Clean, planned, without screaming." The rain started again outside, light and rhythmic. I turned off the sound and just watched the visuals. The collapse, the dust, the calm that followed. The faint reflection of my face on the laptop screen looked different. Steadier, sharper around the edges. For years I had lived in reaction to others. Now every movement, every choice felt like my own. When the last video ended, I closed the laptop gently and looked around the empty kitchen. The walls caught the moonlight through the open window, pale and silver. I could hear the house settling, the beams groaning softly. I whispered to it, "You've carried enough." Then I turned off the light, walked upstairs and lay down. The air felt lighter, almost kind. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. Morning light spilled pale and silver across the hardwood floor. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows misted over, little rivers of water still racing down the glass. The world outside glowed damp and clean, but the air inside the house carried a different stillness, heavier, waiting. I brewed tea instead of coffee that morning. The soft clink of the spoon against the cup filled the silence. The kitchen, almost bare now, looked foreign. Sunlight touched the empty shelves where Rick's mugs once sat. I traced the ring a coffee cup had left on the counter and smiled faintly. Even stains outlast people sometimes. A knock broke the quiet. 3 polite raps, hesitant but firm. I opened the door to find Janet, my next-door neighbor and oldest friend, standing on the porch in her yellow raincoat. Her gray hair was frizzed from the humidity, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Morning, Margie," she said, peering past me into the house. "You've been quiet. Thought maybe you'd gone to visit the kids." I stepped aside. "Come in before the mosquitoes carry you off." She wiped her shoes on the mat and entered, eyes sweeping across the sparse room. "Well, you've been busy. It looks like you're moving out or robbing yourself blind." "Just decluttering," I said evenly. "Too many memories gathering dust." She chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Decluttering's one thing. Emptying half your house. Folks are starting to talk. Let them." Her brow furrowed. "You sure you're all right, hon? I know about, you know." She lowered her voice. "Rick and your niece. The whole town's buzzing. People always find out." "I'm fine," I said, setting her a cup of tea. "Gossip doesn't bother me anymore." Janet sighed and sat, wrapping her hands around the cup. "I saw a truck from the city permit office the other day. Everything okay with the house?" I met her gaze. "Everything's perfectly fine with the house." He studied me for a moment. "Just be careful, Margie. After everything you've been through, sometimes doing too much too soon, it catches up to you." Her tone was kind, but her words landed like pebbles dropped in a pond. Ripples of caution spreading quietly through my calm. "I appreciate that," I said softly, "but this is long overdue." After she left, the silence returned, only now it hummed differently, charged with something between defiance and peace. I walked through each room again, more slowly this time. Dust motes spun lazily in the air where the light touched them. The echo of my own footsteps felt like company. I could still hear Janet's voice lingering. "Be careful, Margie." In the living room, I noticed a letter slipped under the door. The envelope was damp from the rain, stamped with the city seal. Maple County Department of Building and Zoning. Inside lay a single page, formal, impersonal, printed in black ink. "Permit approved. Demolition authorized." I read it twice. The words didn't shock me. They didn't thrill me either. They simply fit. Like a puzzle piece finally pressed into place. I placed the letter on the table beside my teacup, steam curling against its edge. Around noon, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hi, Mom," she said carefully. "You sound distant." "I'm just tired." "I know things have been rough," she continued. "Dad said you've been acting strange. He's worried." I let out a quiet laugh. He's worried. I think he just doesn't want things to get ugly. Ugly happened a long time ago, sweetheart. She went silent. I could hear traffic on her end, the distant honk of cars. Look, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Jason said he saw movers or something. No movers. Just me. Okay, she said softly. I wish you'd tell me what's really going on. Sometimes, I replied, it's better when people don't know. It keeps them safe from their own opinions. Mom, she started, but I ended the call gently before she could finish. For a moment, guilt pricked me, sharp but fleeting. Then I exhaled long and steady. There are things that can't be explained, only lived through. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in again, low and gray. I lit a small lamp and sorted through another drawer, receipts, notepads, a few old birthday cards. My hands paused over one envelope marked to my forever. I recognized Rick's handwriting immediately. Inside, a yellowed anniversary card from 20 years ago. To my wife, my constant. I folded it once and dropped it into the trash. The doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't Janet. It was a man in a blue jacket holding a clipboard. Mrs. Hale. Yes. City Safety Inspector. Just need a quick walkthrough before we finalize clearance. He followed me through the empty rooms, jotting notes. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper filled the air. In the kitchen he looked around and said, "You've lived here a long time, huh? 35 years. He nodded slowly. Never easy tearing down a place like this. Lot of stories in these walls. There were, I said simply. At the door he handed me a copy of the signed clearance. You'll get the final schedule next week. Once it starts, there's no reversing it. His eyes softened as he said it, like a man who'd seen too many people hesitate at the edge of goodbye. I understand, I said, taking the paper. He tipped his cap. All right then. Good luck, Mrs. Hale. When the door shut behind him, I stood still, holding the clipboard's carbon copy. My name at the top. The word approved stamped in red. The ink looked wet even though it wasn't. That night the wind picked up again, sweeping leaves across the porch. I made soup from a can, the kind Rick always called lazy dinner. I smiled at the thought and took my time eating it, spoon by slow spoon. The phone rang once more. Janet again. I almost ignored it, then answered. I just had to ask, she said without greeting. You're not doing anything drastic, are you? What makes you think that? Because I know that sound in your voice, she said. That calm, steady kind. You get that when you've already decided something. I was quiet for a long moment. You worry too much, Janet. I've earned the right, she said gently. You've lost a lot, Margie. Just don't lose yourself in trying to erase it. Her words hung there, soft but heavy. I'm not erasing anything, I said finally. I'm just clearing space. She sighed. All right. Just promise me you'll call before you do anything permanent. I promise. We said goodnight, and when I hung up, the quiet filled the house again. I walked to the kitchen table and looked at the papers spread across it. The permit, the inspection note, the signed approval. Beneath them lay the old card I'd thrown away earlier. I pulled it back out, smoothed its creases and placed it beneath the demolition notice. One life layered over another. Past under present. The lamplight shimmered on the ink, the soft glow tracing my name like a signature of belonging. I picked up the pen resting nearby and added my initials to the bottom of the approval sheet. The sound was small, just a single line of ink, but it echoed through the hollow house like thunder. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. A loose shutter banged against the siding, sharp and rhythmic like a warning trying to get in. I looked toward the door, half expecting another knock, another voice asking if I was sure. But the street was empty. The night still. I turned off the lamp, letting the room fade into shadows. The papers remained on the table, faintly visible in the dark, a pale patch against the wood. I stood there for a moment longer, then whispered into the silence, I know exactly what I'm doing. And the house, loyal and listening, said nothing back. The words left my mouth and hung there, soft but final. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows like it wanted to listen. I reached over, turned on the small kitchen lamp, and the room bloomed in amber light. The papers lay where I'd left them. Flat, precise, untouched. The signature looked strange to me. My own name, and yet it felt like someone stronger had written it. I stood there for a while, watching dust float through the light beam. The air smelled faintly of rain and lemon soap. My stomach tightened. I hadn't eaten since noon. Hunger wasn't what I felt. It was something deeper, like the body reminding me I still existed. I opened the refrigerator. Almost empty. Half a stick of butter, 3 eggs, a lonely tomato, and the leftover loaf of bread from last week. That was enough. I wasn't cooking for anyone else tonight. I decided to make one last proper meal. The knife slid through the tomato with a soft crunch. Juice bled onto the board, staining the wood like faint watercolor. I sliced quietly, each movement deliberate. The house echoed with small sounds. The scrape of a chair leg, the hiss of the pan, the low hum of the stove. The kind of noises you never notice until everything else is gone. As the butter melted, I found myself whispering to the air, "You've seen so many dinners, haven't you?" The walls didn't answer, but I could feel them listening. The smell filled the kitchen, warm, rich, simple. My hands moved on instinct. Crack the eggs, stir gently, add a pinch of salt. I remembered cooking the same breakfast years ago for Rick after our first fight. He'd sat at the table reading the paper, pretending not to notice my red eyes. I'd placed the plate in front of him and he'd said, "Looks good," without looking up. That was how our apologies always sounded, domestic, wordless, edible. I flipped the eggs and turned off the flame. The hiss faded, leaving a pocket of quiet that felt too big. Setting the table felt almost ceremonial. I used the good plate, the one with the tiny crack near the rim from the Thanksgiving Jason threw a fork across the room when his team lost. I remembered scolding him, then laughing 5 minutes later because the gravy had spilled everywhere and Rick made a joke about drowning the turkey. Those were good moments, small and forgettable until you start to lose them. I lit a candle even though the overhead light was on. Its flame danced uncertainly, reflecting in the silverware. For a moment I thought of setting more plates like old times, but the sight of empty chairs was enough to make my throat tighten. I left it at one. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down and looked at the food. Simple, quiet mine. When I took the first bite, the taste nearly undid me. It wasn't the eggs or the tomato or the bread. It was memory. It was the thousands of meals cooked out of habit, duty, hope. All those mornings, lunches, dinners. Proof of a life spent serving others who rarely saw the service. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to taste everything. The bread's crunch, the warmth of the butter, the salt. Halfway through the meal, the clock chimed 8. The sound carried through the house, sharp and echoing. I looked toward the hallway, half expecting to hear Rick call out, "You forgot to wind that thing again." The silence that followed was heavier than any scolding ever was. I spoke softly to the empty chair across from me. "You'd hate this dinner. No meat, no sauce. Too plain." My voice didn't tremble, it almost sounded amused. "You always said a meal wasn't worth it unless it impressed someone. But this," I gestured at the plate, "this is exactly enough." A breeze slipped in through the cracked window, stirring the candle flame. The scent of rain mixed with butter and bread, and for a brief second the moment felt holy. Not religious holy, just human holy. Ordinary and perfect in its stillness. When I finished eating, I washed the plate slowly, running my thumb over the tiny crack until it disappeared beneath the suds. I dried it with a towel and placed it back in the cabinet. One final act of order in a life that had survived chaos disguised as routine. As I turned to leave the kitchen, something tugged at me. The chair. The candle. The glass half full. I walked back, sat down again and stared at the flickering flame. "I used to think love was about staying," I whispered. "But maybe it's about knowing when to stop standing in the same fire." The flame leaned sideways, then straightened again as if nodding. Later, I walked through the rest of the house carrying the candle like a lantern. Shadows wavered along the walls, stretching and shrinking with each step. In the living room, the couch was gone. Only the outline of its legs marked the carpet. In the hallway, the pictures were missing, but the nails still stuck out of the plaster, tiny reminders of where faces used to hang. I trailed a finger along the wall, feeling the roughness of paint beneath my skin. Each groove felt like a scar, something healed but never forgotten. I stopped in front of the empty space where the family portrait once hung. The faint square of unfaded paint was still visible, lighter than the rest of the wall. I stood there a while, remembering the day that picture was taken. Rick had insisted on matching shirts. Emily's hair kept falling out of its braid and Jason kept sneezing. We'd all laughed, and for one frozen moment, everything looked perfect. Now that light square on the wall was all that remained of it. A ghost of color, a memory of smiles. I returned to the kitchen and blew out the candle. Smoke rose in a thin, curling thread, dissolving into the air. The smell of extinguished wax always reminded me of church, of final notes from a hymn fading into silence. The clock ticked steadily. Each second sounded louder, almost physical, pressing against the edges of the room. I leaned on the counter and closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids I saw the same table, but crowded. Emily laughing with food in her mouth. Jason teasing her. Rick at the head of the table, glass in hand, telling some story about work. And me, moving around them all, serving plates, refilling drinks, smiling when someone thanked me. I opened my eyes again. The table was empty, the candle gone, the chairs still. I didn't feel grief this time. I felt completion. Like a chapter sliding shut with a soft click. I carried the glass of water to the sink and poured the rest down the drain. The sound was gentle, final. Then I turned off the kitchen light. Darkness folded over the room, warm and total. But before I left, I switched it back on again. Just one light glowing above the table. The demolition crew would come soon enough, and I didn't want the house to sit entirely in the dark. It had sheltered me, held my pain, listened to every whisper. It deserved one more night of light. I stood at the doorway, hand on the frame, looking back. The table gleamed faintly beneath the bulb. The signed papers rested beside it. My glass of water was gone, my plate washed. Everything clean. Everything still. I whispered to the room, "Thank you." The word felt too small, but it was all I had. Then I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle for good. Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, patient, as if the world was washing the house one last time. The house glowed behind me like a lantern in fog. Rain pattered on the porch roof, soft as breath. I stood for a moment in the open doorway, feeling the warmth on my back, the cool, damp air on my face. The light I'd left burning in the kitchen window flickered against the puddles. I whispered once more, "Thank you," and closed the door without looking back. My shoes splashed against the gravel path as I walked to the car. The night smelled of wet earth and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I placed my purse on the passenger seat, started the engine, and eased out of the driveway. The tires rolled slow over rain-dark asphalt. Through the rearview mirror, I watched the window's square of yellow shrink, then disappear. Dawn came reluctantly. Gray light spread across the horizon, diluted and soft. I parked half a mile down the road near the old gas station, beneath the rusted Maple Street fuel sign. From there, I could see the curve leading to our property. Their property now, I supposed. I sipped coffee from a paper cup gone lukewarm. Steam rose faintly in the cold air. Each exhale fogged the windshield and I wiped it clear with my sleeve. The lot across the road looked like a scar, flattened soil, scattered gravel, yellow caution tape fluttering in the breeze. What had once been walls, rooms, memories had become silence shaped like loss. The demolition had finished 2 days earlier. Quick, efficient. I hadn't watched. Some things are better left to the sound of distance. Now I waited. At 9:03 a.m. I saw the first car turn the corner. A silver SUV, spotless even in the drizzle. Rick drove. Chloe sat beside him, her hair twisted up in that effortless bun I used to envy when I still bothered with mirrors. 2 suitcases balanced in the back, bright stickers from Santorini clinging to their sides. They looked sun-kissed, relaxed. People stepping back into their old life after a perfect escape. The SUV slowed, blinkers flashing, then rolled to a stop where the driveway used to begin. For a few long seconds nothing moved. Then the doors opened. Rick stepped out first, phone in hand, still talking. His voice carried faintly through the rain. Something about luggage, about keys. Chloe followed, stretching, smiling, until her eyes lifted. I saw the moment realization hit. Her shoulders stiffened, her mouth opened, then closed again. Rick turned, following her gaze. His phone slipped from his hand and landed in the mud. He didn't notice. From inside my car the world felt muted. Raindrops streaked the glass in crooked lines. I could hear only fragments. Chloe's sharp gasp, Rick's stammered words, the dull echo of suitcase wheels tipping over. They stood there at the edge of the lot, staring at the empty ground. The foundation had been cleared to bare earth, smooth as a wound healing over. The faint outline of the old porch remained, a rectangle of darker soil where wood once stood. Chloe pressed a hand to her chest. Rick bent down, pawing through the dirt like a man looking for something he'd never lost but always assumed was his. He shouted then, not words I could make out, just raw, useless noise. The kind that cracks on the edges. I didn't move. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, the leather cool beneath my palms. Second car arrived, Emily's. Jason trailed behind in his truck. They must have come straight from the airport. I recognized the same confusion on their faces as they stepped out, expecting laughter, a welcome, a house to walk into. Jason froze first. Emily called out, "Dad?" Her voice broke on the word. Rick turned toward them, face pale, rain dripping from his hair. His arms moved wildly, pointing at the lot, at nothing, at everything. Emily covered her mouth. Where is it?" Chloe's voice rose behind him, sharp and brittle. "She did this. She had to." Jason shook his head. "That's impossible." "She wouldn't." "She would," Chloe snapped. "She's spiteful. You know she is." Rick turned away from them, hands on his knees, breathing hard. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the rain had washed away whatever authority he used to wear like armor. I could almost hear his voice years ago. "Once something's old, it's useless to me." And now, standing in the ruin of his own arrogance, he finally looked old himself. I lowered the car window an inch. The rain's sound sharpened. A breeze carried fragments of their argument, anger tangled with disbelief. Jason kicked at the mud, shouting something about insurance, about legal papers. Emily cried quietly, her mascara bleeding in streaks down her cheeks. Chloe stormed toward the street, pulling out her phone. Rick stayed still. His hands hung useless at his sides. When he finally lifted his head, his expression wasn't rage or even grief. It was vacancy. He stared at the ground as if the shape of the house might rise again if he looked hard enough. The rain soaked through his shirt. He didn't care. And then, faintly, his lips moved. Maybe he said my name. Maybe he said why. Either way, the wind swallowed it. I reached over and turned the ignition key just enough to warm the engine. The hum filled the car like a heartbeat. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm. Older, yes, but whole. Across the road, Emily crouched, pressing her hands into the dirt as if to feel proof. Chloe paced in circles, phone to her ear. Rick didn't move. The house had been theirs by assumption, not by right. Now the land was mine by silence, by patience, by truth. But I didn't smile. Not the way stories expect women like me to smile after revenge. This wasn't triumph. It was closure drawn in clean lines across wet earth. A horn sounded somewhere down the road, a delivery truck trying to pass. I started the car and rolled forward a few feet, enough to see the whole scene clearly. 4 figures in raincoats framed by the void where their comfort used to stand. Rick finally lifted his head toward the sky, blinking against the drizzle. He looked lost, like a man trying to locate himself on a map that no longer existed. For one brief, almost merciful moment, I wished I could tell him that houses don't disappear overnight. They fade one unkind word at a time. That I had been erasing this place for years before the demolition crew arrived. But mercy was a language we'd both forgotten. I drove closer, stopping just before the curve. They were too distracted to notice me. Through the windshield, I could see the old oak tree still standing near the property line. Its roots twisted deep into the earth, its branches dripping with rain. The only thing that had survived untouched. Rick turned toward the tree, shoulders sagging. I saw him mouth something again, perhaps a prayer or curse. The others followed his gaze, confusion etched across their faces. And for the smallest heartbeat, our eyes met. He saw me. Or maybe he just saw a car idling in the rain. Either way, he didn't call out. Neither did I. I shifted into drive. The tires splashed through puddles as I pulled away, slow and steady. The rearview mirror caught one last glimpse of them. 4 figures standing in a patch of rain-soaked earth, shadows of a life undone. The sky began to brighten. The rain thinned into mist and sunlight spilled across the road ahead. I rolled the window down fully, letting the air rush in, cool and clean. The scent of wet soil filled the car. My fingers loosened on the wheel. Behind me, their voices faded into nothing. Ahead, the road curved out of sight. I didn't look back. The road uncoiled before me like a long gray ribbon still wet from the rain. Drops clung to the edges of the windshield, scattering light as the clouds began to thin. The wipers swept back and forth in slow rhythm, keeping time with the quiet in my chest. I cracked the window and let the air rush in, cold, clean, alive. It smelled of pine, asphalt, and something almost new. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. The rearview mirror showed nothing but the curve of the road behind me and a fading patch of sky. No house. No voices. No trace of them. The silence in the car wasn't loneliness anymore. It was space. A small song played on the radio. Some old tune from the 70s about second chances and long drives. I hummed without thinking, my voice thin and unsteady at first, then stronger. The sound surprised me. I hadn't heard myself sing in years. The highway narrowed into a two-lane road lined with oak trees. Their branches arched overhead like open arms. Sunlight broke through in shards, catching puddles that gleamed like glass. I slowed when I saw a sign for a diner, the Maple Grill, open 24 hours, the kind of place truckers trust and locals never stop loving. I turned in on instinct. The tires crunched on gravel. The engine clicked softly when I cut it off. For a moment I stayed in the car, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching steam curl from the hood. The smell of bacon drifted from the building. My stomach tightened again, this time in hunger rather than nerves. Inside, the diner was warm and softly buzzing with life. A bell chimed as the door shut behind me. A waitress with tired eyes and kind hands nodded from behind the counter. "Morning, sweetheart. Sit wherever you like." I chose a booth near the window. The vinyl squeaked as I slid in. A mug appeared in front of me almost immediately, filled to the brim. "Cream and sugar?" she asked. "Just black," I said, and she smiled like she approved. Outside the world gleamed. The rain had left the parking lot shining, and the rising sun caught every droplet on the window. I wrapped my hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into my fingers, into my pulse. The waitress returned with a plate of pancakes, unsolicited but perfect. "You looked like you could use something sweet," she said. I laughed quietly. "You read minds now?" She winked. "Only the easy ones." When she walked away, I took a bite. The syrup was too thick, the butter too much, but it tasted like something I hadn't known I missed. Simple kindness. Each mouthful anchored me a little more firmly to the present. In the reflection of the window I caught my own face. Not the pale ghost I'd lived with these last months, but a woman still capable of softness. The lines around my mouth no longer looked bitter. They looked earned. Two truckers chatted a few booths away. A toddler at the counter clapped as his father poured more syrup. Life went on here, unaware of the ruins behind me. That thought didn't sting, it soothed. The world didn't revolve around my story, and that realization felt like freedom. I finished half the meal and pushed the plate aside. My fingers traced small circles on the tabletop. Across the glass, a stray dog trotted by, nose low to the ground, tail wagging once. It glanced at me through the window before continuing down the street. Even that small motion, a creature just moving forward, felt like an answer. The waitress stopped again. "You headed somewhere or running from somewhere?" "Maybe both," I said. She chuckled softly. "That's how most good stories start." I smiled back. "Maybe this one ends that way." She left the check face down on the table as if to give me privacy for whatever thoughts had come to visit. After paying, I stepped outside. The air had changed completely, bright now, carrying the smell of wet earth and diesel from passing trucks. The sun was higher, brushing gold along the wet pavement. I stood by my car watching the road stretch northward, endless and quiet. For a moment I leaned against the door, eyes closed, feeling the warmth soak into my skin. The engine from a distant rig rumbled past, shaking the air, then faded into nothing. My pulse matched its rhythm. The world was moving again, and I was moving with it. I opened the glove compartment to check the envelope with my savings, a few clothes folded neatly in the back seat. Enough for now. Enough to begin. I caught sight of something I hadn't noticed earlier. A photo wedged in the side pocket, yellowed from sun. It was from the early years. Rick and I in front of the half-finished house, his arm around my waist, sawdust in my hair, both of us laughing at nothing. For a long second I studied it. The woman in the picture looked young, hopeful, a little foolish. I didn't hate her. She had built something, even if it didn't last. I placed the photo back gently and closed the compartment. Back on the highway, traffic was light. A line of geese cut across the sky above me, flying in perfect formation. I rolled down the window again, letting the wind catch my hair. My reflection in the side mirror looked alive, wrinkled, yes, but present. At a red light near the next town, I caught the smell of lilacs from a roadside garden. An old man stood watering the flowers. When our eyes met, he lifted his hand in greeting. I lifted mine back. The smallest exchange, yet it settled something inside me. Proof that the world still offered gentleness to those willing to see it. The light turned green. I drove on. By noon I reached a rest stop overlooking the river. The water shimmered like glass, slow and patient. I parked and walked toward the overlook, gravel crunching under my shoes. A breeze tugged at my coat. I rested my hands on the railing and watched the current drift past. It carried leaves, branches, fragments of what once was, moving them onward, not fighting the flow. I thought about how I'd once feared endings, believing they meant erasure. But standing there, I realized endings are just quieter forms of continuation. A family arrived behind me, parents with 2 small children. The youngest girl, maybe 6, laughed as she tossed a pebble into the river. It plunked once, ripples expanding outward. She clapped, delighted by the simple cause and effect of joy. Her mother caught me watching and smiled politely. Beautiful view, isn't it? Yes, I said. It really is. They lingered a while, then left. The sound of their laughter trailed down the path long after they were gone. When I finally turned back toward the car, I caught my reflection in the driver's side window. The wind had loosened my hair, the sunlight caught in the strands. My face looked softer somehow, less guarded. I studied it for a long time, the way you study a painting you suddenly understand. I thought of everything that had been said and done, of how silence had become my language of survival. I thought of the house, gone now, like a sentence finally punctuated. And then, without meaning to, I smiled. Not the polite kind that hides pain. Not the brittle one people wear to prove they're fine. This smile came slow, deep from the chest, from a place too tired for anger and too full for regret. It didn't need witnesses. The wind brushed across my cheek as if to seal it there. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the radio fill the quiet once more. A new song played, something light, something about beginnings. As I merged back onto the highway, the road stretched ahead, bright and endless. The sky opened wider than I remembered. I didn't look back. The corners of my mouth stayed lifted, gentle, certain, free. If this story made your heart ache and your hands tremble, subscribe for more true-to-life revenge stories, where pain meets power and silence finds its voice.